guys, good morning. I'm Kimberly from the Fat Quarter Shop, and we are on week 2 of our beginning cross stitch series. So in our first series, we talked about cloth, thread, needles, and just general supplies you need. So if you have questions on that, you want to refer to last week's beginning cross stitch. This week, I'm going to focus on just basic stitches. I'm going to go over different ways to stitch, tips, just the way that I do it, and then we're gonna, in our next post, we're gonna go about reading a pattern. I think if we did reading a pattern first, that might confuse us, so I'm just gonna go bare basics here today. So today I am working with 14 count Aida, which is the most common. In our links below, we will have a link to this color if you're interested in this color. We're going to go over 14 count Aida. We're going to talk about 10 count Aida, and then we're going to talk about linen or even weave type of material. So let's start with the easy, which is 14 count. Right now I have this, I cut it down a little bit and I put masking tape on it. Masking tape will stay rather than painter's tape. Painter's tape will come off. Or if you have a serger or a sewing machine, you can zigzag. So that is how I would prepare my fabric. I'm using a Q-snap, which is my preferred frame. You can put it on and tighten it as you go. My first tip would be, before you start your project, no matter what kind of fabric you're working on, you want to iron it. Make sure that your iron doesn't have any gunk in it before you iron on it. Iron it, get it as flat as you can, and then also wash your hands. So when I'm traveling, because I do cross stitch a lot when I travel, or I'm at a dance show or at a basketball game, I take wipes in my purse or my cross stitch bag and just constantly, at least once an hour, clean your hands, because you don't want that oil getting on your fabric. And one question I get a lot is, do you wash your projects when you're done? And I don't, and that's one of the reasons, is because I keep my hands clean. So those are my first 2 tips. So I'm ready to go. I am going to start with 26 needles, size 26. Bowen is the brand I use. You can get tapestry needles, lots of brands, lots of prices, anything you like. So I've got Bowen 24. I'm going to start with DMC because that is the most widely used, and I'm going to show you what I do. So I'm going to do the loop method first. So because I'm doing the loop method, this is how I decide how much thread I'm going to cut off. It is not scientific. I'm going to pull it through 3 times. 1, 2, 3, and cut. And I have found this is the perfect size for my loop method. If you are doing a different method we're going to talk about later, you would make it half the size. So from here, I'm going to, there's 6 strands.
Sorry.
Oops, that's funny, oops. So DMC has 6 strands of embroidery floss, and what I do is I put my fingers really tight, pull 1 strand, and just pull. So I'll set this aside. I'm going to straighten my strand a couple times. That'll keep it straight. I'm going to join it together. By doing the loop method, you're going to have 2 strands, which if you're working with 14 count, you want 2 strands. I'm going to then try to thread my needle. So I'm going to turn to the side so that Lily can zoom in, and we're just going to start. We're mostly going to be on the side on this. So let me turn and she can get set up. When I'm stitching, I usually have a pillow in my lap, like I have today, just so that I can just have something to set it on. So when I'm threading my needle, this is probably the hardest part for me, is I will squeeze the thread as tight as I can, put my needle
Also, can you advise people on Instagram that the feed on YouTube and Facebook is better?
Okay, so if you're on Instagram, go to YouTube and watch, because we're zooming in. So I've pulled that through. So now I've got 2 strands, and I'm going to just show you the English method. When you're cross stitching, you always want your stitches to go the same direction. So here, the way that I go is bottom left to top right. So I'm going to pull my thread up, go through the top right, and it is going to look like this. Now for the loop method, I'm going to turn over and you see this little loop. I'm going to pull this through, and on this I want it to be tight, and I want that loop to be at the top, not at the bottom. And I'm going to go down into this stitch, not through the loop, because if you go through that loop you're going to lose your thread. And then you go back and you go back through the top. And I'm just going to keep stitching. The English method is where you would stitch one stitch at a time. And you'll see I always just pull up, go back. I never try to do, like go super fast. I feel like my stitches lay flatter this way. So this is the English method. If I'll show you on some patterns in a little bit when it's best to use this versus another method. So I'm going to do a couple more stitches. I'm going to do 6. Oops. So there I went through the wrong hole. I'm going to just pull it back out. And at the end of this video, I'm also going to show you how to unpick your stitches. I have lots of tips that are going to be at the end. So if you're bored right now and you're more of an advanced stitcher, I do have stuff at the end that I think you are going to enjoy. So, like I said, this is the hardest part, is threading the needle. Okay. So always just going the same direction when I pull my stitches. I make sure they're taut but not too taut. If you pull that really hard, you're going to make your holes bigger. So try to have the same tension throughout so that your stitches look even. So there's 6, and that is the English method. Now, if you're doing something that is in lots of rows, you will want to do the Danish method. So I'm going to start over at the bottom, and I'm going to show you this method. This is what I use generally most of the time. So you're making a row all the way to the end. And then I'm going to go back the other way. This is all personal preference. Your stitches, I think when we get to the end, you're going to see the stitches look the same either way. Now I can tell my thread is kind of getting a little bit twisted. So at this point, I'm going to hang it upside down and just pull a little bit, make it less. That will make your stitches lay flatter. And I have some other tips in a little bit on what I do when I'm stitching to make your stitches even. I'm going to show you that in a little bit. Okay, so now those are 2 methods. You can do either one, but you can see if you're looking at my stitches up close, you cannot tell on the finished product which way you did it. So again, personal preference. You can do whatever is most convenient for you. Now I'm going to show you if you're stitching rows. I always go top to bottom rather than I go top to bottom rather than bottom to top, and I'm going to show you why. So if you're doing we went horizontal, let's go vertical. So if we go vertical, just gonna go 1 over. If we go vertical, I'm gonna go, if we're going up and down, I would do the English method. And I would go top to bottom, and you see I'm still going in that same hole. I'm not changing, I'm still going, I wouldn't go this hole just to make it easier to save thread. I would still go bottom left to top right. It keeps your stitches even. So I'm going to go down a couple, and then I'm going to go up and show you why I wouldn't do it. That's why when I'm piecing, or when I'm stitching, I don't go bottom to top unless, you know, I have to. So we've gone top to bottom. Now I'm going to show you going bottom to top. And again, I'm going to let even my thread out a little bit. Okay, so I'm going to go in this hole. Now, like I said, I don't like to go this direction, even though your stitches go the same way. I just prefer to always start in that bottom left. So if you were going to go top up, you have to start in the top right, and your stitches will come out the same. It's just that you're starting in the top right hole rather than the bottom left. And let's see. So you can compare the stitches, they look the same. So that is that's traveling. When I'm stitching, I'm going to show you an example of color choice. So for example, on this piece, I always stitch my lighter colors first. So when I stitch this flower, I went yellow first, light pink, yellow first, white, my light pink, then my dark pink. I like my darker threads to pop out, and the last stitches you do are going to show the most. So when I did the bee, I did the white first, the yellow second, the black third. If you do the black first and then white, some of your fuzz from the black might get into the white. And again, on this leaf, there's a light green and a dark green. I stitched my light first and my dark second. Now that is something I looked up on the internet, and that is not something that is, not everybody does that. So that's just a preference that I use. Also, if you see these little X's that are all over the place, I would stitch these, the English method, one at a time. If I was doing the flower, I would do the Danish method and do a complete row all the way across and then all the way back is the direction that I would stitch. So that is that. Now I'm going to show you something that I love to do. It is something new that I have learned. I'm just going to go up a couple, or actually I'll just go back over here. It is called railroading. So especially if you are using a light thread, your light threads will show distortion or unevenness more than dark thread. So on dark thread, you won't see it as much, but when I do this, this is how I do it. I will do my first, the bottom stitch doesn't matter to me because you're not going to see it as much. So I don't waste my time on the bottom stitch. It's only on the top stitch. So I'm going to just do the row across, adjust my lights a little bit. And I will say this does take double the time what I'm about to show you. It takes twice as much time. but it's fabulous. Okay, so here again, I'm going to just let my thread hang, straighten it a little bit so that it's straight. You know, I do that quite often. Okay, so this is probably going to be hard to understand, but what you want to do is when your stitches go over, you want them to be even. So to do that, you can put your needle between your threads, that splits the thread, and go directly into your hole and pull it through. That makes that top thread perfectly even. So and you want to split the threads right at the needle point, or at the needle. You know, you don't want to split them way down here. You want to put that needle right in here. And at first, my first project that I did this on, it took forever. And then you just kind of get the hang of it. I always do this with white. I never, you know, dark threads, I usually do it, but white threads is, you will really see the difference. So you're just splitting it, and it is called railroading. So it's going to give you a more professional look, but like I said, it is going to take more time. So this is just a personal preference if you want to do it or not. By the naked eye, I cannot tell a difference, but if it was white, I would be able to tell a difference. So I've stitched that. Now I'm going to show you how I end my stitches. So on the back, you've got some rows. So you've got horizontal rows, vertical rows, wherever you want to end your stitches. I usually do about 6. So I just put my needle, my tapestry needle, under about 6 stitches. That's my general okay, so when you do that, I look to the front, and I want it to be slightly taut, so I'll just pull it a little bit. Make sure that you're not pulling so hard that you make your holes bigger. So I'll do that, and I'm going to cut right at where my stitch is without cutting your actual stitch. That is going to give you a really clean back. Especially if you're working with a dark fabric on the front, if you had tails on the back just hanging off, when you get it framed, you might see that tail. You might see that loose fabric on the back. But again, it's personal preference. So that is how my back looks. So now I'm going to show you a trick, and we're going to hope that it works. I'm going to cut a thread that's a different color just so you can tell what I'm really doing. If I'm using the same thread, you might not be able to tell. Okay, this might confuse you guys, so I'm going to try to go slow. Sorry. Okay, so let's just say that for some reason you finished this whole section and somehow your thread came undone. So now you've got that loose, which is what you just pulled under. But you don't want to, you don't want to have to sit there and unstitch just to pull it back under, or pull it out and then restitch. So if these come out, you can take, now you can use any thread for this, you're not going to ever see it, but I'm just using a different thread so that you can tell what I'm doing. Let me just thread it off camera. And I did the 2 threads. So here you go, you've got 2 threads, you've got this loop. So what I'm going to do is go back through like I did the first time, where you pulled your thread, or where you sewed your thread under. You've got a different thread going. Make sure you don't see it on the front, just like you did before. Sorry, I'm trying to get situated and I'm
We're very zoomed in, guys, so it's a very small margin.
Okay, so there you go. So I'm just trying to get this loose end back in. So I'm going to pull this through. So you've got that, and you've got this little loop hanging out over here. So I'm going to get all the way to where I've got this loop right there. Now, I'm just going to put my little fingers in. I'm going to get the thread that needs to go back through, kind of pull it, and I've got that thread right in that loop, and I'm going to yank it. 1, 2, 3. And if you do it fast, all that thread goes right back in. So that is something that I somehow came up with a long time ago. I hope I didn't confuse you guys. So that is a way to, if your stitches come undone, you can just pull them back through. Now I'm going to go over back stitching and straight stitching. So, thank you. I'm going to use this dark thread. For back stitching, I prefer to use 1 strand. You'll just follow whatever your pattern says. I'm going to be honest, and when my pattern says to use 2 strands, I use 1 because I feel like they're too strong. So on back stitching, I'm going to use a slightly shorter length just because I think it's easier. So on this one, I'm just going to knot it with 1, not with double. So I've got a single thread. Now I'm going to show you how I start and how I do a back stitch. I am not a professional at back stitching, so I'm just going to warn you on that. So I'm going to go through, you know, I sealed off my threads there. I'm going to go through a different area so that I don't have too much bulk in the back. I'm going to go through, and here I'm going to make sure all my thread is hidden. And I don't want to just start stitching just because sometimes I feel like the thread gets loose. So I'm going to go through this very end stitch 1 time. That's going to lock that in place. So now if I yank, my thread doesn't come out, and it's not a knot, but it's just held in place. So that is how I start a back stitch. I'm going to go over. Okay. Okay, so I always go, I'm going to try to show. I go right to left, right to left. So I'm going to go right to left. I'm going to go all the way over here to this one. I'm not going to put my thread in this one. So I'm going to go right, all the way back to the right. To the left. And I'm going to go right to left. Back stitching is my very least favorite part of cross stitching. And bless you. And I will avoid patterns that have back stitching. And it's kind of one of those things, like I talk about in other videos, is you should do what you like and what you love. And I avoid things in my life in general that I don't like. And back stitching would be one of those.
What is back stitching used for?
Back stitching is used to outline pieces. I don't have anything that's back stitched here to show you, but it's just used to outline an area. Or I can show you on this piece. Let me find one. Right here, this is a back stitch. That gives like a little hanger to the ornament that Lauri Holt put together. So there's an example of a back stitch. And then the reindeer horns or hooves, or I don't know what that is. Those are back stitches.
Antlers.
Antlers, there you go, sorry. But you could, sometimes people backstitch for accents. And so this is how the backstitch looks. Now if your pattern calls for a straight stitch, a backstitch is one stitch at a time. So like I said, right to left, right to left, right to left. If your pattern calls for a straight stitch, it's one stitch. So if your pattern calls for a straight stitch and it's over 3, I'm just giving you an example, you would go over 3 and just pull it in. It's hard to see that, so it's more of a puffy look. And if you needed to do another one, so that's kind of what a straight stitch looks like rather than a back stitch. So straight stitch is just all the way across, back stitch is single. Now I'm going to show you a French knot. Okay, so I said I did not like back stitch. I hate French knots. There's no other word for it. I hate them. I'm going to show you a couple times. Now again, when a pattern tells me to use 2 strands of a French knot, I never do. I always use 1 strand. So the way that you do a French knot is you just come up in the hole. If you're using Aida, just come up in the hole that Aida uses. You're going to take your needle. You can wrap it around. I usually do twice. So you've got that wrapped around twice. Now you're going to go back, and you're not going to go in that hole that you came up in, or it's going to go back and disappear. You're going to, I just go up a tad. Put your needle in. Put your finger right by it and pull down, and you've got a little French knot. And that one actually looks pretty good. So I'm going to do it again. But it's all about, like, if you do your loop over here and then put it in, it's not going to work. So again, you're going to loop it around. I do twice. It's all personal preference. One thing that I always do is when I'm going to do a French knot for a particular pattern, I will go in the very bottom of my work and do a couple and practice before I really do it, because I'm so bad at it that I have to get, and I do redo them a lot. If they're not perfect, I will redo them and start over and drive myself crazy. So again, I'm going to go around twice. I'm going to go above my stitch just a little bit. Now, put my finger here, pull that thread, and I've got a little French knot. And I'm so impressed with myself this morning. My French knots look great. There is also a colonial knot that you can do. I find them to be difficult. They look similar to a French knot, but they're a little bit different. I haven't had good luck with them, so I'm not going to show you just because I don't want to show you something that I'm not familiar with. So that is stitching and just some general back stitching and French knots. Now what I think we should do is move to 10 count Aida and work with 6 strands of Aurifloss. So give me a second to get ready.
Do you want to take questions now? Or
yeah, I'll take questions.
Okay.
So let me take questions, and Denise is going to help me get ready, and I'm just going to set this to the side.
Okay. How do you choose the English method versus a different method?
Okay, so the way that I choose it, let's see. There. Okay, so if I'm doing this brown, just tell me if you can't see me, Lily, I'm sorry. So if I'm doing this brown, I will do the Danish method. I will go all the way across and all the way down. If I'm doing this B, I would do the English method one at a time. And you know, I did have a question that I could probably do, I actually should do right now. I had a question on this right here. These, doing this, where you go up and down. We had some questions. This is our Vintage Christmas by Lauri Holt, and people were asking tips on that. And I think we should go back to the 14 count and let me show you how you do that, because I have really good tips on this. So let's go back and do that before I forget. So I'm going to
also, are French knots something you would do at the very end?
Very end. You would do your cross stitches first, your back stitches next, and then you would do your French knots last. That would be the very last thing. So I am going to go ahead and show you this. So I'm going to get set up where you can see me. So again, I'm going to take my I'm going to go ahead and use this dark brown so that you can see it, and it will show an example of why I do things the way that I do. So I'm going to do this loop method again.
I can move around you right now, Kimberly, if that's easier.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so there's the loop. Sorry, I couldn't figure out. Okay, so I'm gonna again start with my loop method, and I'm gonna show you a different method of a way to start on my next, So I've got this loop started. I'm gonna show you how you would do where you're gonna move around. So again, we've got this, and I'm just gonna show you if you were doing this pattern and you were doing this border, the way that I would do it. I would do it the English method. So okay, so again, I'm going to start the loop, and again pull that loop to the top, go down, and I'm going to do 3 stitches the English method, and I'm going to go ahead and do it the railroad, where I pull my thread in and split my stitches and go down. So I'm going to do 3 stitches just like Lauri's pattern. One, two. Okay, so I've got 3 there. Okay, so now we have to go up. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to do 2 stitches over, and then I'm going to show you my trick. And like I said, on a border like this, I would do the English method, 1 stitch at a time. I would definitely not do the Danish method where you go all the way across. I would not do that in any way. Okay, and this is really important if you are working with a dark thread. So, and this is me and my OCD and my perfectionist self. So if you go down here, there is a thread hanging right there behind your work that when you frame, you might see that black thread. So I'm going to show you how to avoid that. So I'm going to pull up to this next stitch, and I don't want to see that, so I'm going to turn my work over. I'm going to pull my needle through these stitches and pull it up. That brings my thread over, go down. See, so that pulled my thread where before it was here, and you might be able to see it through. And I'm going to finish that stitch. And I'm going to do it one more time for you. So again, I'm doing the English method. On the bottom stitch, I don't worry about the railroading, but on the top I do. My thread is getting a little tangled, so I will let it hang and just pull it. On this top thread, I'm going to split my stitches. I never like my thread to go through on the back whenever I can avoid it, especially on dark thread. You're going to see it. It's just like having loose thread on the back. So we're traveling. If you look on the back, you know, you've got this going. If you look to the back, that's what you've got going. So you don't see, you don't have any threads hanging behind stitches that shouldn't be. I'm going to do the second one, and then again I'm going to just explain what I just did. So if you go into this thread down here, this hole, and you pull it through, your thread went from here to here, and you've got dark thread right there underneath. If you don't care about that, just keep stitching. You don't have to do it the way I do it. Like I always say, do whatever you want. I'm just showing you my way, and my way is not the way that everybody has to do it. So I've got that. I complete my half stitch. I go over. This thread is diagonal. I'm going to pull it through. Right there. So now when you're on the front, you do not have any dark fabric or dark thread on the back. So that is my tip for that. And that is how I did this cross stitch. Now this thread is white, so you should see. So like right here, you don't have to pull that thread through, but on this piece I did, because I didn't want thread back there. But again, you should do whatever you enjoy and however you want to do it. Okay, so now I'm going to take some more questions before we go to my 10 count Aida.
Can you just zoom back out real quick?
Okay.
This takes a minute. And let's see. On the frames of Lauri Holt designs, you use English or Danish? I think they meant, you know how Farm Girl has that like checkered?
And then the white frame.
So the white frame is what we just talked about.
Yeah.
So that is what I just showed. And that would be the English method, one stitch at a time. I can also show you this one that's hanging on the wall. And this one, let me get a needle out to show you how I did this. Sorry, I can't see in the camera. So I did this all the English method. So I, again, top to bottom, I would stitch 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and then I would go back up 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, but I would never have red thread under these. I would move it under the stitches just like I showed you. So in something like this, you would use the English method, but on the, if you're going to do this bowl, you're just going to do the Danish method all the way across and all the way back. But again, you should try it and do whatever you like, but your stitches don't look different. Whichever method you do, your stitches are going to look the same, and nobody is going to know what you did. So that's why I say do whatever you think works best for you and whatever you enjoy.
And Do other brands of floss tangle as well?
Yes, all thread tangles. There's different quality threads. So DMC is great. Cosmo is a higher quality and tangles less. Aurifloss is a great quality. It's probably the same as DMC in terms of the only floss that I've found personally that doesn't tangle very much is Cosmo. There are cheaper brands that you can find at Hobby Lobby, Joann's, or whatever your craft store is in your country. The cheaper ones I would never use. I feel like thread is very inexpensive as it is. Your cloth is going to be what's more expensive, but I would never use those cheaper brands ever. DMC is perfectly fine. It's your cheapest. It's your most widely available. Almost all cross-stitch patterns show DMC. I think DMC is great.
Okay, we've had a lot of questions asking why you're using a single strand, and if you could also do the methods you're showing with more strands. Some people are asking specifically 6 strands.
Yes, I'm doing that next.
Okay, perfect.
So that's part of the next, and I'm going to show how. That's how I start with the loop method. I also start with the loop method because it leaves less, you know, you don't have as. You save thread, which that's not really why I do it. It makes the back really neat. I like things neat. I'm sure you guys, if you watch me all the time, know that I'm like a little OCD. So let's move to 10 Count Aida. So 10 Count Aida it's better for beginners because it is easier to see. It is a great quality. It's by Zweigart. Lauri Holt came out with this. She's the only person on the market. She's got 3 colors. She has Daisy, which is white. Oatmeal, which is like a light tan. That will be back in stores in March 2019. And she has burlap, which is darker. So this is burlap. We're going to work with burlap today. On her cloth, I prefer to use Aurifloss. So Aurifloss comes on, it's also 6 strands. It comes on a cute little spool. She has this little collection of threads that she uses on all her cross stitch, and I like the way you can store it in here and keep it, and you know, it can just, it's easy storage. So I'm going to be using Aurifloss. I'm going to be using size 24 needle. Lauri also has her own brand of tapestry needles that you can use. Size 24 has a bigger eye, and size 26 would not work with hers. So I'm again going to turn to the side and we'll start working on Lauri's. So, and I do always use a pillow, so I've got her needle and the floss. Now the floss, I just kind of pull maybe twice. So I kind of just pull a little bit more. What the general rule is when you're starting, and you're gonna, if you're gonna do it the method I'm showing you now is 18 inches is your thread, but I just do it, I just pull whatever I'm comfortable with. So I've got this squeeze, the threads, and I'm gonna try to pull I'm gonna try to thread it, and you can see it didn't work. So I'm gonna try again. This, when you're working with her 10 count and Aurifloss, you would use 6 strands. So, still didn't. Sometimes I'll use a little bit of spit. That's probably not.
Related to this, would Lauri Holt's needle threader work for this?
She doesn't have a needle threader.
Oh.
That I know of. So she doesn't have one because I know all of Lauri's stuff.
Okay.
So, and I would not recommend a needle threader with anything with 6 strands. I actually would not recommend a needle threader for any of this cross stitch because I feel like a needle threader would shred your thread. So I would say no to all of that. Okay, so I'm going to pull this down. And this time, we're going to just start. I feel like we need to be like there. Sorry.
Sorry, give me one sec.
There we go. Okay, so you can see this 10 count, and you see behind me this pillow is white. The reason I'm using white is because anytime you're working with a darker fabric, especially a navy like this, or a black, or even this brown, if you've got white behind you, and you've got a really nice light, like I've got a really nice Stella light here, you can see your holes better. So I'm going to start in a hole, and you can see in hers the holes are bigger, so it's easier to see. So you just pull through. I'm going to go ahead and go to that top and pull. Now I'm going to turn it over, and we're going to cover our stitches. So I'm going to pull until I've got a little tail, and I'm going to hold that tail, and we're going to cover it. So I'm going to pull that down, and I will go to the front to show you what we're doing. We're going to go over the top, go to the back, and I've still got my finger there, and cover it. I really like the look of this 10 count. It's very easy to do, and it has a very vintage look. So if you were doing the loop method like before, I would only do that on 2 strands. I would never do it on anything higher. That's just my personal. And then also, okay, so we've covered our stitches and it looks beautiful. I don't have any loose stitches coming out at all. So I'm just going to kind of just keep going, and then I'll go backwards. Also on this, I do not railroad because you have 6 strands. I think that you could somehow. It's not, I don't do it. So on this one, what I do instead is I straighten my thread a lot. Just straighten it, and you can see that the more you straighten it, the less movement it has. And just keep stitching. I think this I'm also going to show you on this how to unpick stitches. So I'm going to do 2 rows or 3 rows, and we're going to unpick stitches and talk through that, and it'll be easy to see. Okay, so now if you had to move up rather than down, which is why I always go down to up, if you go to that next row and put your needle in here and come back out, your stitch just came out. So if I had to go up, this is what I would do. I would go to this next stitch. Sorry. I would go here, do my half stitch, go back to this stitch, and then keep going. That way I'm still always going from the top left, bottom left to top right. I always like to do that instead of, like, this would be a big no-no to me to like do that, because then it's like you're not going in the same hole, and I feel like it looks different. So I'm going to undo that. So now let's talk about unpicking stitches. So if I'm going to unpick and I can keep going, I would just do this and I would just unpick, right? And I would do it with a needle, not a seam ripper or anything like that, and I would just be very gentle. You don't want to yank it. You don't want to like yank it, because your holes will get bigger. And you can see that these holes now are bigger because we've stitched in them and we've pulled the stitches out. If you want to even that out, I just do this with my fingers on the front and the back, and it's evened it out a little bit. Now if your stitches have been in there a long time, it is not going to be as easy to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and finish this row, and we're going to finish it off, and then we're going to talk about unpicking stitches. So, but if I was unpicking as I was stitching, that's what I would do, is just unpick, even it out with my fingers, and keep going. Darker thread is harder. If you have a dark thread that you have stitched and it comes out, you might have, for example, black. You might have black fuzz all over your cloth. What I would do at that point is get tape and put the tape I'm going to show you how I would do it. So if you had fuzz, I would literally just do that type of thing on the front and the back, and that would get your fuzz out easily. If it doesn't come out, I would kind of go like this kind of thing. So that's what I would do if you've got fuzz left over after you've unpicked your stitches. And I keep going on and on about unpicked stitches, so you obviously know that I have a lot of experience with it. So I feel like this cloth that Lauri has, it goes a lot faster because you can see your holes easier. So I've got to the end of that row. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish off. I'm going to turn it over. And when we started, we stitched over stitches on this row. So I wouldn't finish it off in this row because then you would have too much bulk on the front. So I'm going to finish it off on this top row. And again, I try to do 6 stitches. I'm going to pull it. Look to make sure that looks okay to you. If it doesn't, you can like just pull it. And then you clip it, clip right to the but don't undo your stitches. Okay, so let's pretend that we've got a lot of stuff. We've got all these stitches, right? And right here we have got to we've got something wrong here. For example, we don't, but let's just pretend. And I'm going to unpick all these stitches and I'm going to show you how I do it. I clip on the front. And these are really nice OmniGrid sharp scissors. You want sharp scissors. You're just going to go through one of the layers. You're going to pull it away. If you pull it away, you know you're not into the cloth. So I'm going to pull that and I'm going to clip it. I'm going to do that a couple times maybe. And then we're going to just start unpicking. Now again, I'm just going to use the needle that I have. Now when you're unpicking, I clip as I go. So I'm going to clip this thread. And the reason I do that is when you're pulling through less weight. So I just keep clipping. And you're going to do your top row first. And I go one stitch at a time. Now what I would not do at this point is I'm going to show you what I'm going to do, but you could like pull this. I would never do this. Like try to pull this through that, because then you pull it And now you've got a bigger hole there than you have over here. And you can see that as you go, this cloth has now got bigger holes. So I try to just have patience when you do this. My general rule is if I see a mistake, I fix it. I don't like to have mistakes in my work, so I will fix it rather than go on. And I'm just making a mess over here with my thread, but it's not wanting to, it's not pulling out easily, so I just keep cutting. I just cut as I go. I would never reuse that thread because, first of all, like I said, thread is not very expensive, and you've stretched it out. And as you've stitched, you've put also thread has memory, so it's gonna like remember those stitches, and it's just easier to. And right here we've got the back that we pulled in, which is why it's harder to come out. So here, I'm just gonna pull all this out. And then what I'm going to do is use this tape. The first thing I'm going to do so you can see when you're looking at this, that's where we unstitched. So it does, so I'm going to just front and back. And then I'm going to have my hand back here. I'm just going to rub. I'm not going to use my needle. Just rub it. And can't see where unstitched. I mean, you might be able to see one little thing right there. You just keep going. So that is how you unpick stitches. So now I'm going to show you, let's take some questions, and then I'm going to show you some other stuff.
Right. Okay. Do you have a general rule on how many spaces it's okay to travel the thread across to a new area versus when you cut the thread and start over?
Yes. So on this little beehive, there, and I'm showing you this because Lauri's doesn't have much travel. On this, I went over that. If it was black, I would do each of those stitches individually. And I can show you how I would do that and how I would start and stop that. I think it's personal preference. I would say more 2 to 3 would be kind of my personal preference, but also you could stitch it and then just look at it and maybe look at it, put white behind it, look at it in the light and see it. Can you see the stitches? If you can't, keep going. If you can, maybe think about how you're going to do that. So maybe on the next, before I show you what I'm going to do, I can show you how I would just do one stitch and stop.
Yeah, which is kind of our next question is how do you start the thread if you're only doing 1 or 2 stitches of color in that area? Which I think you kind of showed at the beginning, right? That was what?
Tell me the question again.
How do you start the thread if you're only going to do 1 or 2 stitches in that color in an area?
I can do that.
Okay.
So let me go, and we're going to do it on, let's go ahead and do it on, let's see. First, I'm going to do it on 14 count. And I will show you how, and I'm going to use a dark thread so you can see. I'm just going to cut this off because this is not real.
This isn't real.
Well, I mean, it's not. We're not going to really keep it. So if you're doing 14 count and you're doing 1 stitch, you for sure need to do the loop method to start. So I'm just going to do 1 stitch and finish it off. So I've got that. Oh, that didn't work. Turn it over. Do the loop method. Okay. Pull it through the loop, and again, pull that loop to the top. If you pull the loop to the bottom, it just doesn't work as well. So I pull it all the way to the top, go down, finish your stitch so you've got an X. Your X looks good. Now we're going to finish it off. Now this is just what I've made up, guys. This is not, this is what I do. I've never read a book about how to do this. So this is the Kimberly Jolly way, I guess. We'll just call it that. So you've got this. Now I don't want to have anything showing except for what is behind my stitch. And here's my stitch. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go down. I'm going to go across. I'm going to go down. I'm going to go across. And you see all this thread is behind here. And to finish it, I'm just going to go through this loop. You can either go through the loop or through the thread. I'm just going to go like this. It has like a little bit of a knot. Now what I'm going to do, now I know y'all are going to say you're not supposed to put a knot on the back. This is my only exception. I'm going to split these threads. I'm going to knot it.
Someone said this method is the KJ.
Yes. So I've got a little knot, and I'm going to clip, well, I want that knot to be closer to the, I don't want it to be loose, so I want it to be close to the thing, and then I'm going to clip right on there. And that is right, you cannot see, when you look at this white, you don't see anything behind it. And it looks neat. It is going to be, if you touch it, you're going to have a little bit more pucker than you would over here. I would rather have that than start seeing a bunch of mess on the back. So that is that. Now I'm going to show you if you were going to do that on 10 count where you need 6 strands.
And do you do the loop method only with an even number of thread?
I only do it if I'm using 2 strands only. I never do it on, I guess if you did 4 strands, you could do it with 2.
But not on 3.
But you can't do it on 3 now. Okay, so here we're going to start again with our floss. gonna thread. Now on this one, I'll do 2 stitches, just so we have something different. So on this, you can't start with the loop method. Well, actually, this is, okay. This is 6 strands. So what I would do, I would start, if we're doing 1 stitch or 2 stitches, I would use 3 strands. So when you're dividing your thread, I would divide it in half. You've got 3 and 3. And I would divide it. Now I would only divide this into 3 and 3 and do the loop method. I would only do the loop method on this 6 count Aida floss if I was just doing 1 or 2 stitches. I would never do this for regular. I would do it just like I did before. So I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do 1 stitch and finish it off, and then 2 stitches and finish it off. And I'm going to do that just because I know most of us are using Lauri's 10 count. So again, I've got my bigger needle. It didn't come all the way through. It is harder to thread this needle. So here I'm going to clip it. So I've got an even. Okay, so we're going to do 1 stitch. So I'm going to start with the loop method, because if you don't start with the loop method, you're going to have thread everywhere. Okay. So we're going to go to the top right. Flip it over. Go through the loop. And go down. Finish your stitch. So you've got 1 strand, 1 stitch. Now let's finish it off. I do the same exact thing. I go top to bottom. I do top to bottom, right to left, top to bottom, and a knot. Now I know you're not supposed to do a knot, but this is just what I do. So I'm just going to find, split it in half, do a knot. I want that knot to be right down on that stitch, not way up here. Then I'm going to just cut each, and there you go. Now if it starts coming out, that just looks like I need to cut it a little bit more. And you know, you can mess with it and see if it's going to stay. And it looks like it's going to stay. If it's not, you just rip it out just like I showed you. Start over.
And could you use a small drop of fabric glue instead of making the knot, or
I would not do that.
Okay.
That's not something I would do. Now, yeah, I would not. I would not use fray check either to put the edges. I have seen people talk about putting fray check here to make it not fray. I would also not do that. I would not put glue or anything else like that around. So I'm going to start off again, 3 strands. Straighten out your thread. I'm going to show you 2 stitches, and then we're going to move on to linen. So I'm trying to thread my needle, and it takes longer with the 6 strands. Okay, so I'm going to do 2 stitches.
Also, Diona on YouTube had been asking, did you tell us in an earlier video that when you cut your Aura floss, there's a correct way and incorrect way to put it through the needle?
Yes. Where you cut is where you thread, so I can show you that in a second. So now I've got 2 stitches. I would probably come up through this back. I would go across. And then I would go back across the other way. And then you've gone through enough to where you don't need to knot. And you just cut. So there's that. So when you are working with any type of thread, whether you're working with binding thread or cross stitch thread or anything, what you want to do is when you pull it off, this where you cut is where you needle. So when you're threading your needle, you thread where you cut and you will have better success. So now, because I'm taking forever, I'm going to go ahead and move on to linen, and I'm going to talk to you about hand-dyed floss. So linen, let me get my needle real quick. Linen or even weave, you're going to stitch over 2. So if your Aida is 14 count, your linen would be double because you're going over 2. So this is 28 count, and we're going to combine this with hand-dyed thread. Hand-dyed thread is just like it says, hand-dyed. If you buy chopped chives one day and you go back and buy chopped chives another day, it will not be exact. It is all hand done. So it will never be exactly the same. So I'm going to show you how you start and stop hand dyed, and I'm also going to show you how you stitch over linen. If you use hand dyed thread or hand dyed fabric, you do not want to wash at the end because it could bleed and ruin your project. So, and there is a specific way that you have to stitch with hand dyed for it to look correct and to give the variegated look. So I'm just gonna try to find the end. This comes where it's already, looks like it's already into lengths. So I'm actually gonna cut this length in half just because I think it'll be easier to work with. So when you're working with variegated, you cannot use the loop method, and you have to keep it in the exact same thread that it is in for the variegated to work. So we're working with 28 count, we're going to use 2 strands. So I'm going to divide this. I've got 4 on the left, 2 on the right, and as I separate, if you kind of keep your finger right in the center and pull, it's going to work better. So I've got 2 strands. I've kept them together. I have not separated them, and I'm going to even this out. If you ever feel like any of your threads still is just too rickety, you can just put your needle through that and look how flat that is. It will help you all the time on any thread. So we've got this, we've kept it together. We're going to thread the needle, which is what I've been, all of you guys want tips on that, and I obviously don't have any because I struggle with it just as much as you do. Just kind of part of the craft, I think.
Mm-hmm. Someone on YouTube said there's a Clover embroidery needle threader that they use.
Yep, so y'all could try that. So I am not an expert at this, and I don't use linen, so, but I have done it in the past, so I do know what I'm doing. So you're going to go over 2. You're going to go over 1 and 2. When you do hand-dyed, you have to do the English method the entire time. You cannot do the Danish method, and the reason why is because if you do that, you will not get a variegation, and I'm going to show you. So I'm going to stitch. You have to start this way, where you stitch over your stuff. So I've got 1X. And I will stitch enough to where you can see the variegated look. And I'm going to railroad to give a really nice even top stitch. And I will turn over my piece until I have all of the bottom covered. And so what variegated what hand-dyed thread does is it will give your piece a unique look. So nobody's piece looks exactly like yours. It's kind of like a watercolor look. Your thread will go from dark to light, light to dark, and it will just, however it comes out is how it comes out. You can't plan it. So right where we started, this is a really dark thread. Darker green, and I did try to pick a variegated thread that I had I keep saying that, hand-dyed thread at home that did have a lot of variegatedness to it. Some hand-dyed thread, for example, white, you might never see the difference in it. If a pattern calls for hand-dyed thread, it usually will also have a DMC alternative so that you can use an alternative. When I'm using linen, I have to have a light. So there's no way I could do. Okay, so now my thread is getting a little wrinkly. So again, I'm gonna pull that, and it's amazing what your hand will just do. Will even it out, and when you even it out, your stitches look prettier and evener. Thread has a memory, and you just want to reform that memory. So what's going to happen is as you go across, let's say we have to go back the other way. I'm just going to keep going, and I'm just going to do this English method. And eventually, the thread will get lighter. So that's kind of all about cross stitch. I'm going to look at my notes and see if I have anything else. Yeah, so I'm going to take some questions, and we'll just go back to the front camera.
Okay.
We have had a lot of you guys request a DMC color card. So they have a new color card that came out. Sorry. And it has all of the colors, including the new colors. So this is something that we have. I am a fan of changing up colors, and I don't really follow the rules. I like to change stuff. So having a color card like this, it has the actual floss. Some of their color cards are photos, which doesn't really work. So having this is really nice. This is something new we have, and in 2 weeks we will have all 454 colors of DMC in stock at Fat Quarter Shop. So that is going to be great for us in cross stitch, and I can take any questions you have. I do want to tell you, next week we will not have a cross stitch video. We are going to have a guest live stream. It is going to be next Wednesday, the 23rd. We don't have a specific time just because we will be filming like 30 videos with her. It is Carrie Nelson from Miss Rosie Quilt Company. So that's going to be great. On January 30th, I am going to be showing you how to read a pattern. So we have got all of Lauri Holt's patterns, but I am going to pick a pattern. I'm going to show you how to start, you know, where to start. You start in center, how to figure all of that out, and how to actually read a pattern, and we're going to start stitching along. That's going to be January 30th, and then anything that I might not have covered in the first set or the second set, we can cover that. But if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them, and yeah.
Okay, just a few funny comments first. Denise Klikzewski on YouTube said your glasses are cool.
Oh, thanks. So these are little clip-on lights. They sold out. We probably will sell out this morning. They're very popular. We have 400 on order. So they're called Vivalux. I use them a lot. I'll tell you a little funny story. Last Friday night, my daughter had a dance, and I was like sitting in my car stitching because it's really far from my house, so I'm not going to drive all the way there and then all the way home and then all the way back. So sitting in the car stitching. I have to go to the bathroom. I go in, and one of her friends is like looking at me, and she says, "Hi, Miss Jolly," and she's just looking at me strange, and I'm like, "What is wrong?" And I get in the bathroom, and I'm like, "Oh, I have my lights on my head, on my glasses." But it's really funny because she's a cute little girl, and she would not make fun of my daughter, but she was probably like, "What is Miss Jolly doing?" It was funny, and then I was kind of like, "Oh, it's funny."
And then Nancy Sue on Facebook, when you showed the lassoing method, she was like, "That was like lassoing in the Wild West." Like when you did the loop method. Sorry.
Oh, I don't get it.
It looked like lassoing. Like you were like wrangling.
Oh, lasso. I'm like, okay, yeah. It's funny.
And then so a couple of like requests that I think we would show in the future are how to, where was it? How to do a quarter stitch, or tips on that?
So yes, so that is more of an advanced thing. We can go over that in the future. I would only do quarter stitching if you were using linen or an even weave or some kind of cloth that you're going to stitch over to. I would never do that on Aida cloth. I don't think it looks good. Lauri's patterns will never have that because we really want to stick with the beginner. But yeah, my advice would be to do that on linen or even weave or Lagona or whatever that's called. Just something that you stitch over to. Yeah.
And Marge D on YouTube was asking, can you use hand-dyed thread on 10 count and 14 count?
Oh yeah, you can use hand-dyed thread on anything. The main thing on hand-dyed is keeping those threads together and not washing afterwards.
And Teresa on YouTube was asking, so the R floss looks chunkier to me. Can you use less than 6 strands if you wanted a less chunky look?
You can use 4 strands. You can take, if I was going to change that up, I would just, in the very bottom left of your cloth, you can always just stitch and see, you know, what do you like? You know, how do you like it? And then stitch. You can do whatever you want. It's just like quilting. Whatever you like, do it.
Alright, and then Smitten Kitten was curious, do you do any other embroidery? She's not particularly fond of cross stitch, but she loves freeform hand embroidery.
So I don't do embroidery, but that's not to say that I can't learn and teach you guys. I would say that would probably not be in the next year. Embroidery is not really my thing, but we can definitely invite a guest to come in and teach. So that would probably be before I would try to do that. I would get somebody who actually knows what they're doing to show us.
And Just Ducky on YouTube says, did you say you prefer top to bottom or bottom to top?
Top to bottom.
Okay.
Just like light before dark.
And Sewing Beck on YouTube was asking, so are you saying if you are doing only 1 or 2 stitches and using 6 strands, you would split them rather than using the full 6 strands for that stitch throughout the project?
If I was using 6 strand, I would never separate the thread just because it's extra work. It gets it tangled. The only reason I did it was so that if you're just doing 1 or 2 stitches, so that you have less thread on the back, I would do the loop method. But in general, 99% of the time, I would just start with the 6 strand, and that's what's the beauty of using the Aura floss on the 10 count, is you just pull it out, put it on your needle, and go. So you don't have to sit and separate.
And just Stucky was also asking, can you mix thread companies?
I would not. I mean, you can do whatever you want to do. I wouldn't do that.
That would be interesting, yeah. And Smitten Kitten had a suggestion what she uses when she's traveling, since you showed a method to hide your thread, your dark thread. She says she puts a thin layer of batting behind her fabric.
Oh,
the
yeah.
Traveling doesn't show.
Yep.
And then I think we kind of showed this, but it might also be a request for the future. Rebecca Sewing on YouTube said, Kimberly, can you show us how to change colors at the end? Mine are always so messy on the back.
So you would just do it the same way as this. So like if you stitched this and you want to keep going, you just keep going and you just pull your threads underneath. And I think that comes with time. You know, some people don't care if they have a messy back. If you don't care if you have a messy back, just do it. Do whatever you want to do. Like, you don't have to do it my way. I am super, like, my personality is just very OCD, anxiety. Like, I like things perfect. If you don't care what your back looks like, I don't care. It's your project. So, yeah, like, if it doesn't bother you, just do whatever you want to do. But changing colors, I just would keep going. But again, I would go lightest color first and then darkest. And when I'm doing a pattern, for example, this, I would, and I'm going to talk about this on the next video, but I would, like if I was going to start, I would start in the middle. So I would probably do my frame first, then I would do all of the white, the lightest pink, the darkest pink, the blue. Then I would do the red. So lightest to darkest, up to down.
That's all I got.
Okay, so perfect. So join me next Wednesday if you are into quilting and you want to see Carrie Nelson on our channel. And if not, I will see you on January 30th with showing you how to follow a pattern. And of course, we'll be going over some of the same things we learned today, so it'll kind of reinforce it for you. But thanks for watching. Follow us on Fat Quarter Shop on YouTube. You can join my Kimberly Stitch Squad on Facebook, or you can just follow the company on Facebook. And definitely like this video and follow us on YouTube. I'll see you next time.